The fall of 1836 brought with it a disturbing stillness to the east of Texas forests. There had been weeks that I rode around the territories near Nacogdoches, inspecting the borders after our victory in San Jacinto. The weight of responsibility for this new nation was still heavy on my shoulders, and seeking the loneliness of the trails offered the only breath I knew. My horse, a robust sorrel named Jefferson, stepped carefully among the exposed roots of the centenary oaks. The light filtered by the hearts created dancing patterns on the forest floor, and the air carried the damp smell of the earth and the leaves decaying. It was a territory that I knew well, or so thought. The trail that followed that afternoon should take me back to the main camp in 2 hours. I had traveled that way dozens of times during the last months, but something that day seemed different. Family milestones, a specific fallen tree, a peculiar rock formation, seemed displaced, as if someone had reorganized the landscape at night. Jefferson showed unusual restlessness. His ears moved constantly, capturing sounds that my human ears could not realize. From time to time he stopped abruptly, the dilated nostrils, as if something that challenged his animal understanding. It was during one of these breaks that I first spotted smoke. A thin and white line climbed between the cups. Perhaps 300 meters to my left, smoke meant human presence, and human presence in that isolated territory deserved investigation. There were still groups of Mexican bandits wandering around the region, as well as indigenous tribes that did not always receive well the presence of Texan settlers. I diverted Jefferson from the main trail, guiding it through the denser vegetation. The low branches scratched my leather jacket, and the sound of the hooves over the dried leaves seemed amplified in the silence of the forest. With each step, the smoke became more visible, but also more curious. It was not the thick smoke of a common fire, nor the black smoke of green wood. It was thin, almost ethereal, as if it came from well-groomed embers. When we finally emerged in a small clearing, what I saw made me pull the reins hard enough to make Jefferson back down 2 steps. A cabin rose in the center of the open space, but it was not a construction that should exist there. I knew each structure within 10 miles, and that cabin was simply not in my mental maps. Even more disturbing was his state of conservation. The wooden boards looked newly cut. The roof of tiles showed recent maintenance signs, and a small vegetable garden. The smoke climbed from a well-built stone chimney, and I could see the orange light of a fire crackling through one of the windows. Everything indicated active current housing, but something in the air, something in the way the light seemed to behave around the structure, made my skin shiver. I slowly dismantled, tying Jefferson to a nearby oak. My hand instinctively verified the presence of the pistol in the holster, not for distrust of human threat, but for a primitive instinct I could not name. Each step toward the cabin seemed heavier than the previous one. The sound of my boots over the dried leaves created strange echoes, as if the acoustics of the place followed different rules. I stopped about 20 meters from the main door, noting the structure was solid, well-planned, precision-carved oak wood, forced iron hinges that still shone without rust. A small but welcoming balcony stretched ahead with 2 rocking chairs positioned as if someone had just gotten up. "Is there anyone at home?" I shouted, my voice carrying the clearing. The silence that followed was not natural. There was no human answer, but there was no usual forest sounds either. No bird sang, no zombie insect, no leaf moved with the breeze. It was as if nature itself had paused to listen. I approached the porch. The floorboards did not grind under my feet, although they look old. Through the main window I could see the interior partially illuminated by the fire of the fireplace. Dark wood furniture, a table set to 2 people, and what seemed to be a meal in half. I knocked on the door with my fingertips. 3 firm beats, military. The sound reverberated strangely, as if the wood was denser than it appeared. "Permission to enter," I announced, following the courtesy that always kept, even in the conquered territory. No answer, but the doorman turned easily under my hand. The inside of the cabin hit me like a punch in the stomach. Everything was perfectly preserved but clearly inhabited. The dining table displayed 2 dishes with still steaming food. A deer stew that could feel the aroma, bread that seemed to get out of the oven, a jar of milk that still showed drops of condensation on the surface. but there was no one. My boots echoed over the polished wooden floor as I moved through the main space. A fireplace dominated a wall, with a stacked wood that seemed to have been cut recently. On the fireplace table, a series of personal effects was carefully arranged. A female hairbrush with blonde strands still intertwined on the bristles. A pocket watch that was regularly marking 4:47 in the afternoon. I looked out the window. By the sun's position, it should be close to 3 o'clock. I took the clock. The metal was warm, as if it had been insured recently. The tisset that was strong, consistent. When I opened it, a recording appeared. To my dear Thomas, with eternal love. Margaret, 1834. 2 years ago. I kept exploring. A bedroom in the back revealed a bed with military accuracy, folded clothes on a chair as if someone had just changed. Man's clothes, thick wool pants, cotton shirt, a leather vest. About the dresser, an open letter. I approached and read, "Dear Thomas, I hope this letter finds you well. Things here in Nacogdoches are busy with all this conversation of independence. I know you believe in the cause, but I fear for the dangers. I promise to be cautious. I'll be waiting for your return on the cabin, March 1836, 6 months ago." But the letter seemed to have been written yesterday. The paper was impeccable, the paint still shiny. A chill traveled my spine. I went back to the main room, watching more carefully. About a bookcase, I found a folded newspaper. The Telegraph and Texas Register dated March 10, 1836. Manchette proclaimed, "Convention declares independence from Texas." I remembered that edition. He had read personally when he left the press, but that copy seemed to have just been printed. In the kitchen, I discovered more disturbing evidence. A pan over the stove contained a boiling water. Cut vegetables over. The meat board seemed to have been prepared moments before. A kitchen knife still displayed dummies of washing, but what most disturbed me was the calendar on the wall. Each March was cautiously scratched until the 15th. After that, nothing. As if time simply stopped, I sat in one of the dining table chairs trying to sew what I saw, the food in front of me still emanating steam. I touched the edge of the plate. It was hot. Jefferson reconned outside, a sound of growing restlessness. I got up and walked to the window. My horse pulled the reins, clearly agitated. But what made me freeze was to realize that the sunlight had changed. When I entered the cabin, it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, with the sun positioned west-southern. Now the light came from directly to the west, indicating about 6 hours. But I couldn't have been there for 3 hours. They seemed to have just been 30 minutes. I went back to the clock on the fireplace, still marked 4:47. The second pointer moved normally, but the main pointers remained real estate. A cold realization settled in my chest. That cabin existed outside the normal flow of time. I began to examine other details that I had neglected. The edges of the furniture seemed slightly blurred, as if they were being seen through water. When I touched certain surfaces, I felt a strange resistance, as if my hand was moving through an invisible molasses. In the room, I found more letters, all from Margaret to Thomas, all dated between January and March 1836. The latter showed growing concern. "Thomas, it's been 2 weeks since it left and I don't get news. City people say there was a battle in a place called Alamo. I'm desperate. For your news, I don't know what else to think. I keep waiting in the cabin as I promised, but silence consumes me." The last letter was unfinished over the desk, the still penalty of paint. "Thomas, I can no longer live on this uncertainty. If something happened to you, I prefer to know. I go to the city tomorrow to seek information. If you return and not, find me here." The phrase stopped in the middle. I left the bedroom and went back to the main room. The food on the table was still steaming, as if it were constantly heated by some invisible source. I played a spoon. It was perfectly real, solid, but there was something different in the way it reflected the light. It was then that I heard the steps, found outside, approaching the porch. Heavy, deliberate steps of male boots on wood. My hand moved instinctively to the pistol. The steps stopped at the door. The doorman turned slowly. The door opened, but no one came in. It remained open, revealing only the forest beyond. But he could hear slow and heavy breathing, like someone tired after a long walk. "Thomas?" A female voice called the back room. My blood froze. It was a real voice, clear, loaded with hope and relief. "Thomas, are you?" Female steps approached the house. I could hear them clearly, but I saw no one. The sound stopped at the entrance of the main room. "Thomas?" The voice now carried confusion. "Who is there?" I remained immovable, barely daring to breathe. The room temperature had fallen several degrees. My breathing began to form small clouds of steam. "You are not Thomas," the voice said, now with a tone of increasing fear. "Who are you? What did you do with Thomas?" A burst of cold wind swept around the house, although the windows are closed. Papers flew from the table, the light of the fireplace shaking violently. "He promised to go back." His voice rose, becoming almost a scream. "He promised! Where is he?" I took a step toward the open door, but she closed herself hard, the sound echoing like thunder. The windows began to tremble on their frames. "You have to tell me." The voice now came from everywhere at the same time. "Where is Thomas? What happened in the war?" And then I understood. Thomas had left to fight in the Texan Revolution. It probably died in Alamo or Goliad, like so many other brave men. Margaret had waited in the cabin, as promised, until hope and loneliness consumed her. And somehow his waiting had crystallized in that place, creating a pocket where time folded upon himself. "He died like a hero," he said aloud, surprised by the firmness of my own voice. Thomas died fighting for Texas's freedom. The silence that followed was absolute. Slowly, the temperature returned to normal. The light of the fireplace stabilized, the papers they had flown flying smoothly on the floor. "Thank you." A whisper came, so low that I almost thought I imagined. The door opened again, this time remaining that way. The afternoon breeze entered, carrying the familiar smell of the forest. I walked slowly toward the exit. In the threshold, I turned to one last look. The cabin already looked different. The edges of the furniture were no longer blurred. The food on the table had cooled. The clock on the fireplace marked the correct time. When I set up Jefferson and looked back one last time, the cabin was beginning to show signs of abandonment. Loose boards, displaced tiles, broken glass, as if the lost time was being quickly recovered. I rode back to the main trail as the sun set itself, carrying me a lesson on the power of love and hope, even when they become arrests that transcend their own death. There are stories on this earth that challenge our understanding, experiences that remind us that the border between the natural and the supernatural is faster than we would like to admit. If you feel that there are more mysteries to be explored in the wild territories of Texas, stay close. Not all the truths we discover in forest can easily be explained by history books. This report was recorded in Sam Houston's personal diaries, discovered in his rolls after his death in 1863. The mentioned cabin was never found by other explorers, despite several organized expeditions based on their descriptions.